I think like just having a good role model, someone who does what you want to do, right? Good dad, good writer, great, you know? I'm excited to have a break from parenting so we can talk about parenting.
So I was actually thinking about you this morning. I was flying back here, and I feel like I'm in a bit of a reading rut. Mm-hmm. Not that I haven't found any good books recently, but I find that my ability to read and concentrate on books is suffering. Have you ever gone through something like that?
I mean, yeah, especially after you read something really good.
Yeah.
Like, that's really dangerous. Mm-hmm. Because when you get something good, then it's like the re-entry problem. Like Walker Percy is like, Walker Percy in Lost in the Cosmos has this theory of re-entry, where it's like when you have the more transcendent the experience, like the harder it is to come down from.
Yeah, I do find like when you write a book, going back to regular life is hard.
Yeah.
You go on vacation, re-entry into regular life is hard.
Yep.
But this is more like I'll read a couple pages and then I pick up my phone. I'll read a couple, but like my ability to read is normally normally predicated on the power to push through that and do uninterrupted, concentrated periods of focusing on something that is not a screen.
Do you think it's because you're in like marketing book release mode?
I do tend to find that, yeah, reading dips are correlated with like periods of burnout or exhaustion or tired, because you have to be able to focus on what you're doing. But also I find reading is like it's a habit. So it's like walking or running or working out. When you're doing it a lot, it's easy to keep doing it. And then when you've been doing it intermittently, then it's easy to come up with excuses for not doing it.
I agree. For me, I have genres that I go back to. So
that's
like
a good way.
Junk, like my favorite genre is like rock and roll, like oral history books. Mm-hmm. So I'll like just find like a music oral history that I've never read. And then I'll reread stuff.
I do that too, yeah. So it's like if you're struggling, instead of going, I hope this next book does it for me, this next book does it for me, go back to something that you know does do it for you.
Yep. Call your old girlfriend. No, but like Charles Portis is somebody who like every time I read a Charles Portis book, like I just fall into it and I end up reading at least 1.5 book. Like I'll read the one I'm reading and then I'll read at least half of the next one because
and then you'll go back. Then you'll take that momentum and channel it towards things you should be reading or need to read or whatever.
Yeah, and I'll just be like, I just every night just take a chance on something that's like in my like on my Kindle or something.
Is that when you read? Do you tend to read at night?
Well, I read fiction at night. That's
before bed?
Yeah. I can't read nonfiction because my brain starts going, ooh. I read nonfiction like in the afternoon. Like after I pick the kids up and like get them on the screens and their snacks. And Papa's going out and it's almost pool season. And the great like luxurious, decadent thing about my life now is like I'll just lay in the pool and read for 2 hours and call it work.
Do you get sunburned? What do you?
Like no, I'll like put up the umbrella and I'll either float on a raft or I'll just stand by the side of the pool with a book, just like read.
And it's kind of a screen-free environment also, right? So it's not conducive to switching. Yes.
Yeah, you can't like pick up your phone. I can change music on my watch or I can text Meg. So, like, if there's a kid emergency.
I'm sure she loves that.
Yeah. Hey, honey, can you bring out a bit? No. But, like, you know, if there's any, like, emergency or, she can shout out the window, too. It's not like I'm down the street. But, like, no, like, to me, it's like, I'm very, like, one of the things I'm really into, I used to be a very unfussy, kind of like, I can read anywhere. I can work anywhere. I can do whatever.
Yes.
But, like, now that this is my life, like I've been really interested in like, what are things I can do? Because I do this all the time and it's like work for me. What can I do to like make this lush? Like what can I do to like make this like real sensorily wonderful? So like I spent more money on an Apple monitor recently than like I probably have for like, it was like I just some ungodly amount. The new Mac, like they're like $1,500 or something, which to me is just like, I'm going to pay $1,500 for a computer. But it is so awesome. Like every time I sit to read now, because it's my son Owen, who's 10, he's like, you can't see the pixels, you know? And so it's like, oh, you know, he's like all impressed. And it makes it like, so I'm like kind of interested right now in like silly rituals. And then like, I've always been like someone who I don't have silly rituals when I sit down to write, but I always thought it'd be fun to have like a dumb robe or something that you put on. Or like,
have you found a robe?
No, what I do that's silly, sometimes I'll smoke. I have these cigarette pencils that are like, they're pencils, but they look like cigarettes. And I'll sit there at my desk like an old grizzled. That's like the dumbest thing I do in the studio. That's one of my questions, actually. What's the dumbest thing you do in the studio? I love asking people that. Like, what's the silliest thing you do when you're working?
When I'm writing, well, I listen to the same song on repeat.
Yeah.
It's not, when I say that, people go, oh, what is the song? It's not that. There's always a song of the moment.
Do you write down which song you were listening to with
no,
different books?
It's usually what I'll do is I'll look, you know, when like the Spotify wrap up comes, I'll be like, oh, and it'll give me sort of, it gives me what each of the, like for a normal person, you know, that list of songs, they're like, oh, you probably listen to this song 20 times and this song 15 times. For me, it's like 700 listens of this song, you know.
Yeah.
Like I forget which band it was, but they sent me a note that I was like in the 0.0001% of listening to that band. But I'll tend to listen to songs on repeat over and over and over again. And I can, if it's somewhat serendipitous, like how I find those songs, but like my productivity can rise and lower depending on how good the songs have been recently.
Yeah, I wrote a book proposal to Pet Shop Boys, West End Girls with that method. And I threw it out. So I don't know like if it works for me.
Yeah, maybe that's not the right song.
It was fun to listen to it. I mean, it was a good soundtrack.
You mentioned Walker Percy, Shelby Foote, who's Walker Percy's best friend. He would famously write in a bathrobe or whatever. Yeah. And I find actually though, and I talk a little bit about this in the Discipline book, I do think like as a writer, you can dress how you want, your office can look how you want, you can set it. I do think there's actually something about getting dressed, putting on clothes, shaving, etc. Like I do feel like there's the fresher you set yourself up to be, the fresher you're like. There's something to me about just scuffling around the house in your pajamas that might seem fun, but is actually maybe like not conducive. Like I'm much more interested in the Robert Caro like dresses in a 3-piece suit and goes to the office. Yeah. Not quite there, but like I do think like that seems like a silly ritual, but it also makes sense to me. Yeah. The idea of like how you look is a reflection of how the seriousness with which you're taking the thing. I guess one of the points I was trying to make when I was talking about making the process like lush is I'm very interested in sensory things right now. And to me, clothes are like a sensory thing. It's like the feel of the clothing that you're wearing. And so I feel like when you're wearing a suit, it's really a feel thing. It's like a touch thing. And I think that like when I'm interested in like sensory cues you can give yourself to like when it's time to work. Right? I have a good one. Did I tell you this? You haven't been to my office since, but I have Joan Didion's writing chair.
You told me
and it's like this. It's not comfortable really at all. But there is something about
I bought Joan Didion's furniture. It's all terrible.
Well, it's all basically furniture from a little old lady, a very trendy but little old lady.
But like she's probably had it for like forever too.
Yes. I mean, she's like the age of my grandmother. So it's like whatever your grandmother's stuff would be if your grandmother was Joan like Didion. The coolest person in the world. But I have found there's something about sitting in that. And like I have little things like that. Like I have like a little pen knife that is from Rome, like the 2nd or 3rd century. Like it looks like a knife that like a senator would carry, right? I just got this new one. It's like it's like it's a rock and you can see all the chipping on it, but it's like a primitive stone tool from like 10,000 years ago or something. I like to have little mementos or things, and I just know them. I can touch them or move them around. They're obviously like little luxuries or they're antiques or whatever. I kind of like searching for them is almost more fun than having them. But there is something about like a vibe or an environment. And I think having the chair or whatever, I have little pictures and prints in my office, but there's something about like kind of setting the mood of your creative space that I think matters.
And I think that's really like, I mean, I think that really ties into your work. I mean, so much of your work is about going to the past, bringing the past to the present, and finding the lessons for the contemporary now. And so it makes sense to me that you have like old artifacts around.
Then the other one that I got recently as a sort of reminder about saying no is I have this little, it's probably no bigger than this note card. Yeah. And it's an inter-office memo from the Truman administration. And which again, the idea you can just buy papers from Truman's White House, like you'd think, it was like a few $100s. It wasn't like this priceless antique that, was sold at Sotheby's. But anyways, it's a memo from his secretary, and it says, due to all of the constraints on the president's time, should I tell them that due to so many similar inquiries, the president must decline? And then it's that the president must decline is underlined. And it says in this sort of scrawled handwriting, it says the proper response is underlined, HST. So it was like Truman writing a note to his secretary, like you have to start, like she passed him like, an interoffice memo, like you have to start saying no. And he's like, yes, you have to start saying no. And I had that on my wall next to two pictures of my kids. And the idea being like, I'm having to say no, not just because there's too many requests, but you're saying no in order to say yes to other things. So again, I think obviously I could just write the word NO or I could just remember this, but there is something about having that embodied from a person that's much more busy and important, but also that I admire on the wall. And there's something about that that's like, I look at that and I go, I'm just going to ignore this email, or I'm just going to say no. I'm going to pass this to someone to say no.
Well, I'm obsessed with that word embodied right now, because I'm actually really into embodied cognition right now. This idea that we think with our bodies, it's literally our, and I think that's something that you're really good about writing about, is how much an active life, whether it's walking or running, or being active with your body.
Have you read The Body Keeps Score?
I haven't read that. I just read a book called...
Was it it was one of the top 20 best-selling books of the year last year, and it's like 30 years old, and it's basically a textbook. Yeah. It should not be selling the way that it is, but it is a reminder of the power of a really good title, and then when you tap into a concept that is true to people.
And what would you say is the
concept is basically that like your body is operating with an understanding or a cognition of the things that it's been through, whether those are traumas or, bad experiences or pain or memories that you might not be aware of at a conscious level or operating by, and that your body is processing that information. The idea that we're a product of what we've been through. So we think we're making, I find, for instance, like whenever I get really upset or triggered about something, like that thing is never what's actually going on. It's that thing means some other thing to me. And either I have a conscious understanding of what that thing is and I go, oh, this is that thing. This is why I'm acting that way. Or it's actually a really helpful bit of self-feedback because you're like, oh, why this person spoke to me in this way, and that hit me in some soft or, strange place. And so now I need to figure out what that thing is, because whether they should have acted that way or not, your reaction was disproportionate or not something you fully control. You weren't totally aware of what's happening. And so anyways, it's a very good book. The guy's name is unpronounceable.
Yeah, the book I read is called The one I read recently is The Extended Mind. And that's Annie Murphy Paul's book. And her thing is that we think with our body. She kind of like almost, I see it as concentric circles. She's like, we think with there's inside our body, and then, oh my God, why am I blanking? Because it's like, this is usually when I like zone out and watch TV.
Yeah.
And do you get that like at night? Is anyone else like?
Was there? I don't know many people that do their best thinking at 7.
Yeah, right. But this idea. Oh, I know. It was thinking with like. Her point is that a lot of our thinking comes from internal stuff with our body, and then our body's interactions with our environment and like the other people around us. And so there are all these different, I know what it was. It's the body, and it's space, and then it's other people. Those are kind of her concentric circles. And so for your note cards, for example, that's like a space thing.
Yeah.
So when you write things down on note cards and have them in a place, you're using space and materials to externalize.
It's like a second brain.
It's like a second brain, right? And when we text each other, that's an interaction where we're thinking together. That's we're thinking I'm thinking with your brain, you're thinking with my brain. And I just really enjoyed, but the thing I really liked about what she talks about with the body, and what I think is really true as a creative person, the body knows what to do before your conscious mind does.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm really, really interested in.
Have you read The Inner Game of Tennis?
No, who wrote that?
That's a very similar book. It's they probably have it here. It's Tom Brady's favorite book, but it's this idea that, for instance, a tennis player, there's sort of the conscious understanding of what you can do, and then there's when your sort of training takes over, and that like almost all great performance is operating at that second level rather than this is sort of the thinking mind, and then the thinking fast and slow is on a similar level, but that's more about cognitive. That's more about cognition as opposed to like sort of performance, I guess.
Yeah, it's like playing the piano. You hear something and it grabs you on some sort of weird level, and then you have to try to learn the piece. And that's like a different part of the brain where you like have to be real meticulous and like learn it. And then you let that sink into the back of your mind. And then when you sit down and do the recital, it's like automatic.
It just happens.
Yeah.
And getting to a place where it just happens.
Trained as an athlete, you would drill and you drill until it's automatic when it's game time.
Do you find that your best writing is in that phase, or is it on the I have to do something today?
Well, I think writing's interesting because it's not in the moment. It's not like, it doesn't have to be like immediate. Like you can go back and fix it. You know what I mean? Like with a drawing, it's a little bit more like when I'm making like an ink drawing or something, that's a little bit more like there's a little bit higher stakes, because if I mess this up, like, I can kind of go back, but not as much. So,
but again, that almost requires a certain level. Like I think early on when you're starting to do something that you are not good at being bad at the thing.
Yeah.
And so one of the things as a writer, I think you learn is being comfortable just sort of doing the thing, just sort of seeing where it goes, which I think is the point between sort of consciously trying to hit the ball very hard, for instance, in tennis or golf, and then just hitting the ball as one's supposed to, and understanding that if you have trained sufficiently, if you've gathered the material, it'll happen. I think one of the things I tend to find, like when I'm stuck, like if I'm writing and I get stuck, like I'm supposed to write today, I don't have anything, almost invariably, like if I just go read stuff, like I take that as a sign that I just need to go do more research. And if I do more research, when even though I might not fully think I know what I want to say, when I have gathered up enough like raw materials or fuel, I just sort of know. It should be easy. It should come naturally for the most part.
I agree. Like my new attitudes towards block are like not, which really just means you don't have anything to say. I mean,
writer's block, you mean?
Yeah.
Yes.
Like my approach to that, honestly, is the same.
Go get something to say.
Go get something to say. Yeah, go for a walk or read. Reading's great. The thing this is going to sound, this is going to sound really egotistical, but I like to read myself. Like I'll pull diaries off. Because I have all these, something I do, which is in line with the book, is I love to read what I wrote on this day 5 years ago.
Yes.
So I'll grab a diary and I'll read like a page.
And you organize them by dates or by
they're
periods?
They're up on my shelf, like ordered by date. And so I can go right to the spine. I've written the dates on the spine, so I can go there and I read. And now I like to skip to the next year and see what I read on that day. And your brain automatically makes connections between the things, but spookily, it's often the same problem.
Yeah.
Like there's some weird, like and that makes sense. I got this from reading Thoreau because I started reading Thoreau's diary this way. Which is why I like the introduction of the Daily Dad so much when you talked about the value of like reading a book every day instead of just like devouring it once. Because what I decided to do with Thoreau's diary, because it's so thick, this was the annotated version, but I decided to read everything he wrote on the day that on the calendar date that I was reading.
Sure.
And so I had these tabs in the diary. So I just flipped to whatever date. If there was something for...
You made your own like page a day of Thoreau.
Exactly.
That would actually be a great book too. A page a day of Thoreau.
Yeah. And University of Chicago Press did that.
Oh, they did?
There's like a daily Thoreau, yeah. But it's not his diary. It's from everything. So It's from the diary, but it's also from like all his
letters
essays and
stuff.
letters and everything. It's pretty good.
Have you read A Calendar of Wisdom?
Well, I was going to ask you. That's Tolstoy's Page a Day. I was going to ask you actually when you got interested in this idea of the daily devotional type thing, because I have a memory from childhood.
So the Daily Stoic came because my agent suggested it. He had published a book called The Daily Drucker, which is Peter Drucker's like sort of theories of management and leadership, which is really good, which I had read. And I thought it was interesting because like someone like Peter Drucker, you take some of these thinkers, you go like, well, where should I start? I think that's often a tough place. Like, where do you start? If someone's like, where should I start with Thoreau? Or where should I start with Robert Greene? Or where should I start with Tolstoy? Like, where do you start? And there's something sort of spending a year with them as a Catholic. It's like, where should I start with this band? Did they perfectly encapsulate everything that's great about them on a singular album? Or do you pull up like the essential Bruce Springsteen or whatever? And is a playlist a better way to sample of things? And I think the page a day format is really good for that. And then, so I hadn't actually read that many books in that genre. I grabbed a couple and there's a bunch of things I didn't like about them.
Yeah.
A lot of them, like for instance, there's a 366 Zen one that I liked, but doesn't have dates. It's just 366. There's something, even though it's totally arbitrary, about picking the date that's really good. Yeah. Some are very kind of prompt driven, which I didn't tend to like. I found to be like a little artificial. Some didn't. I don't know. I've read most of them. I think it's hard.
Is Tolstoy's your favorite?
Tolstoy's is probably the one that I read the most and the most consistently. Although I've come to learn some things about it, like I'll fall in love with some of the quotes. And I'll be like, "Where's that from?" And then it's like, "Oh, he made this quote up." Basically, like he plays fast and loose with the translations. Let's say, which whatever, it worked for him. It's a little more religious than I would like it to be. Like it's very, very religious, but. It's a collection of thoughts from one of the smartest people that ever lived, and it's rare. Usually those page a day things are assembled afterwards by like an editor or, the estate or something. And so I like that he did that one. It's for him, but it's great.
So when I was growing up, I grew up with, very religious parents and they still are. And my dad would sit at the table. I never saw my dad read that much, but one thing I would see my dad do is our church had these they were almost booklets. They were almost like they were like zines or something. They were like little booklets. And I think they might have been called Our Daily Bread or something like that. Maybe someone here knows. But they would have they would be by date. And there would be an entry for, read this scripture and then this thought. And I think it's interesting how I was reading a lot of the Daily Dad in the past couple of days. And one of the things I was thinking about is how ambient parenting is. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is like how many of the things that translate, and you get into this in a lot of the entries, a lot of the things that get transmitted are sideways. They're like they're not direct. Like direct is not the way that I don't find that like direct transmission works real well with kids. I think kids
you mean the parent to the child?
Yeah. I think kids really pick up on like the ambient stuff so much. And like everything you're trying to throw at them directly, it kind of like deflects or bounces off. But the things you like kind of just have around. I'm very interested in like the ambient.
And I think that's kind of the idea in a page a day thing, is that you're just dipping in and out of it, and you're getting if you spend enough time with it, you absorb it through osmosis or whatever, and it becomes part of your overall understanding. Where if you read it, if you read the whole thing from start to finish, maybe you walk away 3 or 4 things. But by reading it in smaller pieces over a long period of time, or multiple times over a long period of time, you would end up taking in more of it. And that's obviously been the experience with Daily Stoic. It's like 8 years now. So there's some people who've been reading it every day for 8 years. And it feels weird to me because, who I was when I wrote it 8 years ago, that feels that's very far away. And yet people are reading those pages for the first time.
How do you not repeat yourself, or do you just go ahead?
Oh, continuing to write?
Yeah.
Oh, in the email?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's a good question. Obviously, continuing to write it has been its own thing, and being forced to revisit the same themes. It would be interesting. I wonder if at some point maybe I could categorize all of them, but like to look at the use of certain quotes. Like how have I interpreted them different ways in different days? Has my understanding of it changed over time? I don't know exactly, but I usually I'll come up with a title or some way into a thing, and it kind of, I don't know, it's weird to say that it writes itself, but it kind of just writes itself. Like I usually have a sentence or a thought or a quote I want to use, and then the rest of it comes together.
Do you write them in a big batch, or do you read?
Yeah, I just have one document. It's called Unsent. Okay. I have 2. So I have an Unsent for Daily Stoic and an Unsent for Daily Dad. Okay. And that's where I'm working on them always. And so I'll hear a lyric in a song, or I'll read an article and I'll paste that in there. Or when I go back through and after books I've read, I put all the stuff there. And then I usually try to write 1 or 2 a day, sometimes more if I feel like I'm going to be away for a while. But I try to make a contribution to the pile every day.
Yeah.
And then
edit them?
Yeah, so I write them, and then I tag Kristen, who is the managing editor of Daily Stoic. I tag her in it. She takes it, does a pass on it. It comes back to me to read for the audio, because you can listen to it as a podcast every day. So then I read it out loud, and I usually edit it again there. Right. And then once there is edited audio and edited text, that gets put into a calendar, which I don't really, at this point, I don't select. Like I don't decide what runs on each day. So sometimes people email like, "How'd you know?" It's like I what was today's?
I know you.
But I so it's like I'm just always making them, and then it sort of goes out. But I touch them I touch them when they're written, and then I touch them 2 other times usually, and then it kind of is just this stream of stuff, and that way. There's too much to think about. Like, is today's too similar to yesterday? Too similar than this one? So that they're kind of working out the cadence of all of it. But I'm just always writing them. And to me, the value is in writing them. Like I get something out of writing them each day.
It's a lot of writing. That could be its own.
It's about a book a year, a free book a year.
Yeah.
They're about, let's say, 250 to 300 words, and then you're doing 5 days a week. Then Daily Stoic is 7 days a week. So yeah, it adds up. It's a lot of words. Yeah. But the daily practice of it is really great. It's like a sort of a forced journaling output process.
I cannot recommend. People ask me a lot about how to get started and everything. And I'm always just have some repeatable thing that you have to put out at a certain frequency. Yes. I just feel like
when you make a commitment to, there's a forcing function there that gets over your preciousness. Yeah. And the hardest part about getting good at anything is reps, right? And books, especially, the problem with books is you might only do a handful of them in your entire life. So if that is your reps, you're not going to get very many of them. So you have to have some other way that you're getting the reps. Like comedians, it's going up.
Were you an athlete in high school?
My parents did make me do a sport. I did track and cross country, but not super voluntarily.
Are you a sports fan?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I'm always curious about because sports teams seem to really, really like connect with your stuff. Was that a marketing thing on your part, or was that something where like one team was?
I mean, I definitely wasn't
how did that happen?
I wasn't like, who these philosophy books would be perfect for sports team. So like that was not at all expected. Yeah. And certainly the publisher didn't expect it. I didn't expect it. But when The Obstacles of the Way came out, I got a couple emails like in the first few months that had signatures there was someone from the Rockies, there was someone from the Patriots, someone from another team. And I was like, oh, that's weird. And maybe I only noticed the pattern because the organizations had email signatures and the other people I didn't recognize. Yeah. But so I recognized that pattern pretty quickly. And I think from a marketing standpoint, the publisher gave away lots of books to those groups. But I spoke at the University of Tennessee today. I spoke to the athletics department, like all the different coaches and administrators and athletic directors and whatever. And I was taught what's cool about sports than other, like CEOs don't tend to call each other and recommend books. Right. But there's something about sports where there's like kind of a fellowship and a community in it that's very interesting. Maybe because all the people hire each other at one point as this revolving door, but there seems to be a lot of like recommending of self-development stuff that I think was really interesting. And so that's been just like a cool community to fall into. The military community has been a similar one. Yeah. Politics has been one kind of. I've seen it now like with like the entertainment business. Just industries, like if something works, it tends to make its way through. It just takes time. It takes a lot of time.
I think there's something in Stoicism in particular too that really speaks to that kind of that scene too.
Well, there is this thing. Cicero has a series of sort of fake dialogues about it, but it's called the Scipionic Circle, and these people would meet in the house of this guy named Scipio, and they would talk philosophy, and it's like kind of one of the first like little like groups, like book clubby sort of philosophy circles that we have. They all go on to be these sort of powerful, important people, but they're like kind of sharing book recommendations. I think it's good to have a scene like that where stuff is being surfaced to you and taught to you. And then I think the problem is that some domains don't really have, like there's one of the reasons I wanted to do Daily Dad is like you get surface stuff that makes you better at your work all the time. But there, like the parenting stuff seems to be this kind of like read these books when you're about to have kids and then just like wing it from there. Yeah. And that seemed like the wrong way to do it. Yeah. So hopefully this has that same effect.
I have a question for you about parenting.
Okay.
Do you worry about overplaying the agency of parents?
What do you mean?
Because one of the things when I was reading The Daily Dad was I was like, I love all this stuff. I think it's all super important. But at the end of the day, it's something as my kids get old. This might be something you feel when your kids get a little bit older. I feel very much at the mercy of their environment. It becomes less and less about me, and it becomes more and more about the kind of ambient, like our street. It goes beyond our house to it's our street, it's the school, it's the city, it's the state, it's the country, it's the world. Like one of the things I hate about being a parent is I felt very, and this was probably delusional, I felt very protected from the environment. I felt very much like...
You mean early on?
Yeah, I felt a real agency, free agent kind of thing where it's like, well, nothing really matters because I can bounce out, I can be flexible, I can I can dig a hole in the ground and stay there, if I need to. Sure. Like the minute I had kids, I felt so vulnerable to the world, and it kind of awakened in me just how connected I was to everything.
Well, that's something I was going to ask you. Austin has this amazing book called Keep Going, which I would very much recommend. And, how does one keep going when you awaken each day to a fresh set of horrors?
Yeah.
No, I think there is so much that's fundamentally outside of your control, and you are at the mercy of. I mean, do you have some control over what street you live on, and I think we Stoicism is, to me, the paradox of Stoicism is the idea that we don't have agency over the vast majority of what's happening, but we have agency of how we respond or the choices we make in the face of those things. So I think there's a tension there. But I feel like everyone is struggling with that idea of like, well, I don't like all these things that are happening. I'm not sure if you could find an era though where, like, I just read David McCullough's book on John Adams. I don't think John Adams was like, what a wonderful place and time to raise children, right? Or like, I don't know if there's any period where parents or people have ever felt that, and that's kind of this myth or this illusion that we're chasing. But the idea of just sort of soldiering through, and then the paradox of like, you look back and you go, oh, it was so wonderful back then.
Just mostly nonsense.
Yeah. There's a quote I have in the book from Caitlin Flanagan when she's talking about the dream time of early childhood. She like takes them to the like an ice cream truck, and she gets them like a SpongeBob ice cream, and they were just like blown away that such a truck exists and that you could get ice. She like just all of the and like, so there is something also though about having kids where like who knows what, I don't know what year that was happening, but I'm sure actually if we pulled up like a series of New York Times front pages from that period, right, yes, the world was horrible. And it's always going to be that way. And then what I think, so you are very vulnerable, but it also does actually give you the thing to retreat into, which is this sort of pure bit of chaos and innocence. And
yeah, that was, I just really like having a family because I feel like it's a little gang I belong to. Yes. Like, I just really enjoy the just weirdo. My favorite, like one of my favorite parenting books, if people ask me like a list of my favorite parenting books, like one of the books would be Tove Jansson's Moomin comics. Do you know the Moomins? They're like this little like cartoon character family. And I read those books when I think my youngest was like 2 or 3. And I read these books and I was like, this is where I want to live. Like, this is what I want. This is what I want my house to look like. Like, there's Moomin Papa, and there's Moomin Mama, and there's... like, I like the gang. And I like we even have gang, like, lingo. Like, we have a lexicon in our house. I love it in families. Do you ever think about, like, in your family or, like, where you grew up, like, did you have weird words that no one else would understand, or like weird phrases and stuff like that? Like we have some in our house that I just love, and I'm like, this is it. This is like the best it gets. This is as good as it gets.
It is as good as it gets.
No one has it as good as we do, right?
Yeah. The line is, right? Who has it better than us?
Who has it better than us? Yeah, right. I love that part of the book.
All right, we got some questions, and we'll do signing. Okay, how can parents allow their children to have their own opinions even if they don't agree with it? You want to take
what
that?
Choice do you have?
Yes. Well, this is something I was just talking to someone I know whose son is engaged to be married. He's very young, and a lot of people they know have very strong opinions about this. And I just said, "How are you doing?" Blah blah. And 19 or 20, and he just said, "He's happy, we're happy." And I just thought that's such a it's when you have opinions that you get yourself in trouble. And I think of so much of the conflict between parents and kids are rooted in the parents having opinions about things that not only don't really matter at all, but in the scope of their own lives, as time passes, you will wonder why you argued about these things to begin with. Because it's so easy to extrapolate, right? You're like, well, if I let them dye their hair this color, then they'll think that they can do, like so much of what would actually, if looked at, one, in isolation, and two, without much thought as to what other people would think or what other people are doing, you would be like, yeah, this doesn't matter at all. If that's what floats your boat, go for it. But we don't look at things that way, and so we have opinions. And one of my favorite things from Marcus Aurelius, he says, things are not asking to be judged by you. And when you realize that, like, your kids' opinions are their kids' opinions, their lives are their lives, the fewer opinions you have about things, not only is that just better for overall peace, but I think then when there are some things that you do need to have an opinion about, right?
Right.
And that opinion will carry more weight if you haven't been arguing over the way to sit at the dinner table for 15 years.
Well, like, so I have this thing with my kids where I do mind games where I'm like, what if they're right? I almost take my goal at this point in my life, I'm turning 40 in a month, but we had the same birthday. Did you guys know that?
We do?
Yeah.
I didn't know this. I think
June 16th.
Yes. There we go. So happy birthday. Yeah.
So my thing now that I'm trying to like ease into is what I call a curious elder. And that is someone who kind of assumes the kids are all right, like that's just an ethos, that you just kind of assume that your children are all right and they know what they're talking about. And even if it's true that even if they don't, that kickstarts a curiosity. And so I'll give you a real concrete example. Every parent I know is disgusted by their children watching a YouTube video of another person playing a video game.
Yes.
So it's
inexplicable.
Yeah. But it is. But wait. So I had a day where I was like, I'm just going to make myself sit here and watch one of these videos with him. And I think it was like a Minecraft hacks video or something, where they blow up the whole world with TNT or something. I don't know. And I was watching it and I was like, this is so weird. We're like in front of the screen and we're watching these other people play a game and we're not playing it, but they're playing it. And I suddenly was like, oh my God, this is like me and my uncle sitting around watching football on Sunday. Mm-hmm. We're watching like other people do something. The difference is that when we get done watching the video, my kids know how to do something at their game. Mm-hmm. Whereas like if you watch football, you're not going to be able to like go and like run a touchdown. So, but then I had this other, so like that was like a light bulb. But then I had this other moment where I was like, wait, if people will watch someone play a game, I'll bet someone would watch someone make art, So I got all these ideas for my own business. And that was purely just because that one day I was like, I'm going to sit down with my kids and this thing that repulses me, I'm going to like pay attention to it.
I just wrote an entry about this for the emails. It was too late for the book, but I was thinking about like, if you were on a date, the person would be telling you about the most inane, boring shit, and you would pretend to be interested. You think about what you put up with at work, right? You think about total strangers. You think about your neighbor comes, they tell you about this family vacation. You're like, how did I even get into this conversation? You think about how polite you are to people about shit that is, totally what you feel like is a waste of time. And then your kids are like,
think you might get kids out of it.
Yeah, right. No, but then your kid's like, hey, let me tell you about the thing that I'm most excited about in the entire world. And you're like, oh, like you would never go, to a person, but you'll do the equivalent of that to your kids, which is so devastating and terrible. And you don't again, you actually don't, it would be wonderful if you could feign the same, excitement and interest in such a convincing way. But let's set the bar even lower. What if you just don't express your disdain? Right. You know what I mean? You just say, I don't have to have an opinion about this. This is what we're watching. This is what we're doing. And what a much more wonderful and amicable life you will have if you could manage to pull that off.
I mean, one of the my friend Erica Hall one time, she said she did like this kind of quick thing about how to survive Thanksgiving with family members who have terrible ideas. And she was just like, just pretend you're an anthropologist or like a scientist. At the very, if you can't feign love and attention, just be like, I'm a scientist and I'm taking notes. It's like the Nora Ephron, everything is copy. And I find that sometimes I'll go into that okay, I remember so many afternoons on the playground just being like, okay, I'm an anthropologist looking, around at these people.
All right, this question is the study of Stoic philosophy gaining in popularity or declining? I mean, I would say almost certainly if we just look at how many Rome, let's say Marcus Aurelius' time, is the pinnacle of Stoic philosophy. The entire Roman Empire or sort of Western civilization is like 50 million people. So what percentage of those people were super excited? Like almost certainly more people get the Daily Stoic email than were ever interested in ancient philosophy in the ancient world. So like it might not feel like these ideas have
in the ancient world.
Yeah.
How many
Right.
people were in
Yeah, like so it might not feel like these things have the penetration or the the impact that they did then, but actually it's spread out more globally, but almost certainly the numbers are much, much larger. Philosophy might seem like this sort of obscure academic, discipline, but if you just think about how many people are studying, like even if every year, philosophy degrees are declining, you're just like, there's still a lot of colleges and a lot of universities, a lot of people are interested, which I think is wonderful.
Well, it's interesting. I find that when Stoicism is kind of abstracted to me, like I'm very much like, I fight with a lot. Like when you do your 4 cardinal virtues, I always am like, I'm thinking about like what's the opposite of each virtue and how much me ping-ponging in between them is actually how my work happens.
Do you have it? Do you have, what do you think the opposite of the 4 virtues are?
Well, so for courage, in some ways, I see it more as fight or flight. There are times when flight is more advantageous, and sometimes that fight. I think about for each virtue, there's like a vice in a sense, but then they create a spectrum of possibilities. So I like kind of locate, like for discipline, there's also lack of discipline and like idleness or whatever. And there are times when my lack of discipline actually like is in contact, is in communication with work. But that's neither here nor there.
Oh, wait, I like that. Just actually, Aristotle talks about this, and he uses discipline as the example of what he calls the golden mean. Do you know this concept?
Okay, yeah.
So he basically says, so the discipline is usually rendered as temperance or moderation.
Right.
And he's saying like courage, for instance, courage is actually in the middle between 2 vices. It's in the middle between recklessness, which would be too much courage, like has no fear, thinks only of plunging ahead and not at how the consequences of that on themselves or other people. And then on the other end of the vice spectrum is cowardice, and that courage is actually in the middle. It's the right amount. He's saying the key to virtue is the right amount of the right thing at the right time in the right.
But this idea of being in between 2 vices is really good. Does he do that for each one?
Yeah.
Ooh, okay, I'll read that part.
So like justice, he's talking about like with generosity, right? Which would be a sub-virtue of justice, is like you give everything away and then your family is starving and then you're a penny pincher. Yeah. So it's like somewhere in the middle on all of them. Even I think discipline, right? Like the person who is so regimented, so driven, always pushing harder is the person who doesn't know how to recover, who doesn't know how to rest, who doesn't, and so like, it's funny, obviously I wrote a book about discipline, but like for me, the struggle is not, should I get up at, like this morning, I don't know if it's an example or not, but like I got into my hotel room at 3:30 last night and I had to be at this thing at 8:45, but I really like to run before I do my talks. And so I had this balance between, obviously sleep is important. Obviously you're not going to be able to perform well if you are operating on 3 or some odd hours of sleep. And so this tension between, do I sleep in an hour or do I go for a run? And like which lever of discipline do you pull here? Yeah. And that actually the doing the hard thing is the easier lever for me to pull. Like if I don't feel well, resting is usually harder than forcing, like gutting through it, right? And so for someone else, it might be the exact opposite, right? Like unless they feel amazing, they don't do the thing. But we're both fundamentally struggling with discipline in the same way.
And I love tension. That's like one of my little like pet things I like to think about a lot is like I always use the example of a guitar string. And it's like a guitar string is in between two poles. And if it's too slack, it just buzzes and makes no music. If it's too tight, it snaps.
And also that there's a tuning that you're trying to get to.
You're trying to get to the optimal tension.
Yes.
Between these two things. So that would be, that was really helpful to me. The one thing I did want to say about the Stoics, though, I think the great thing they have in their corner is they're good writers. Yes. Like I'm reading Seneca's letters right now.
Have you read any of Seneca's plays?
I haven't read his plays. I think I've read like a couple of pieces before, like essays, but the letters are great.
Yes.
They're so, because sometimes they get bitchy even, you know, it's just very human. Yeah. And Aurelius is like that too. I mean, it's just like this guy's notebook.
What's incredible to think about in Meditations, this is a guy writing not for publication in Greek, even though the Romans, he was speaking in the philosophical language. And yet there are turns of phrases in there that you're just like, whoa. And it says something probably about, one, if you're not performing or thinking, you can just, it goes to what we're talking about. You just lock in and something just straight from the mind onto the page, stream of consciousness, beautiful stuff. But then also this sort of practice of like, he was trained in rhetoric, trained in writing, trained in poetry. One of my favorite little tidbits about Marcus is like, there's lines in there and they're like, this sounds like more like a quote than a thing. And they've tracked it down. It's like, oh, this is a lost line from a play from Euripides or something. It's like, this is the only existing fragment from that thing. And he's almost certainly quoting it from memory just to himself, or there's little lines from the great poets. Like this is a person steeped in all the great forms of art, in addition to being a politician and a parent and a leader. And nobody's journal is that good. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, and I like Seneca because, like, when you read his letters, you're like, wait a minute, you said this other thing in another letter. You know, he's very human. Yeah. He'll be like, you shouldn't just quote people. You should have some of your own ideas. And he's like, by the way, here's this quote from Epicurus.
Here's my daily quote for you.
Here's my daily quote from Epicurus or whatever. So it's just like really human. So that is one thing. I mean, I think that when you're writing the type of books that we write, you are hoping that people will swim upstream. You're hoping that people will get back to like what's inspired you, because I just think that's the way reading works. I think that's the way music works. I think that's the way art works, is that if you connect with something and then you swim upstream and you see where it came from. I think that's one of the really beautiful, deep things.
I'm talking about this in the next book in the Virtue series. I have this chapter on coaching trees. Like the way they judge a great coach is not just how much they won, but like what did their assistants go on to do? Like how, and in this way, Greg Popovich is probably the greatest coach in the history of sports, just this incredible coaching tree. But I think as a writer, as a creative, like how much did you repay your debt to your influences? Like, did you make them more popular or not?
Right.
Is I think a sign. Like, it's like, okay, you're successful if you sell a few books or people go to your shows or whatever it is that you do. But like, did you have enough of a connection, and did you impact people enough that they go upstream, like you're saying, and go, well, I want to be a fan of the things that made the thing that I'm a fan of. And so sometimes people will be like, they'll like in internet sections, they'll say like, oh, he's just a popularizer. Right. I'm like, what an incredible compliment. Thanks. That's literally what I am attempting to do. So it's not something like I find to be an embarrassment. It's actually also quite hard to do, but to be able to take something that isn't necessarily commercially accessible or immediately attractive to people. Like, look, if through your work people are like, listen to the Beatles, like, okay, like they didn't need your help. But if but if you can help turn people on to things or bring them to a level where then they can go to these other things, I think that's like that's a sign of like a real bit of success in your chosen mind.
My favorite bands always did that too. Yes. Like even someone, like people forget, like Nirvana brought the meat puppets on stage with them. They were all, Kurt Cobain wore a Daniel Johnston t-shirt, like they were always really good at that, even in their brief little spell. And I always, as a fan, loved that. I always loved that. And that's always been a big part of my ethos. I mean, that's why I operate the way that I do. And,
when showing your work, which he has an awesome book about with that title, which is part of being open about those influences and things you're excited about is part of like doing that. It's also both it's easy because you're not like pretending to be perfect, but there's also a selflessness to it because you're exposing people to the things that you like.
It also turns out to be good marketing because when you talk about the stuff that you love, you almost become an art. Like one of the things that I think a lot of people make their way to my work because of the stuff I share instead of my actual books. And so they show up for like the newsletter or something like that because, this guy points to cool stuff. And then eventually I get them, right? Eventually I get, like, hopefully I make something that they want,
I someone told me once, like, if you introduce to people, like, you come to their level, right? So like if you introduce two important people to each other, you're a peer because you facilitated this relationship. And I thought of that as like they were saying this is kind of like a networking strategy. Like, hey, I don't know, you might like this person, and then they're like, who connected us again? And they remember that. And so if you, by recommending music or art or a way of thinking or doing something, or even you just like you recommend a contractor to a friend, and then that like you have a connection there that goes really deep because you gave them something that they used. There's something very special about that.
I agree.
Got anything else you want to?
Do you have any more questions?
There's some. I didn't love all of them. Let's do this. Let's do this last one.
This is okay. No.
Exactly. Let's do this as the last one. Okay. In our reflections on parenting, what do you feel like one could prepare for? And what do you feel like they need to learn? What parts of parenting can one prepare for in advance? And then what are the things that you learn on the job?
You could probably go to therapy. I didn't do that. I still haven't done that, but it might be a good idea.
You'll recommend it, you just won't do it.
You can forgive your parents. That's something someone told me. It's like you can forgive your parents so you can kind of... I don't know if I did that either. Yeah, I didn't really need to. But, my parents, one of the things I was thinking about when I was reading your book is there's this designer named Milton Glaser, and he says, in my parents, I had the perfect gifted and talented program. He said, I had a mother who told me I could do anything and a father who said, prove it.
That's great.
Canceled each other out. And I was thinking about like this kind of like good cop, bad cop of parenting kind of thing, which might,
Do you know the Philip Larkin poem, They Fuck Us Up?
Do I know yes, absolutely. I do. Yeah.
What is it? They fuck us up, our mom and dad.
They may not mean to, but they do. They fill us full of faults we had and add some extra just for you.
Yes, there we go.
They were messed up in their turn by weirdos and maniacs. So do the world a favor and don't have any kids yourself.
Yeah. I only like the first verse.
Yeah, well, you know, you got to take the whole. That's context to me. You only.
Have you read his one about the hedgehog? I like that one.
Yeah, I can't do that one from memory though.
It's about be kind while there's still time.
Yeah, you did. The one you quoted in the book that I love is the trees. The trees are coming into leaf, like something being said.
Well, yeah, that's my. Yeah, he has this poem about celebrating spring, which we're sort of in the middle of, and how beautiful and wonderful it is to see green leaves and shoots and flowers. But he talks about what that means is the passage of a year that is gone forever. And I think about that every time I clip my kids' fingernails. I think of the growth. I go, it's been, definitely not. That's a little far for me. But no, there's something sad about it, right? You're like, I just did this. And then you go, I didn't just do this. 2 weeks or 3 weeks have gone by. And that time is gone forever. And the person whose nails you clipped last time is gone forever. And you yourself, the 3 weeks old version of you is gone. I think there's a morbid sort of Stoic turn of that. And then also something, I think, that gives you a kind of urgency and prioritization and clarity.
And also how beautiful that you get to clip your fingernails and start over. You know, there is a kind of like renewal. That goes with the spring too. Oh, I came up with an idea for the things you can plan for. You can get role models.
Sure.
Right? Like that's you can pick some people who are like down the road who you're like, they seem like they did it really well, and you can get to know them. Like I have some guy friends that are about 10 years older than me, and I find that really, really helpful because they're kind of, and then the thing that really helped me when I was starting out is I got really lucky and got to know some writers who were good dads. And I saw that you could do it. What's that?
A rare breed.
A rare breed, yeah. Well, I remember going to see George Saunders, and I asked him, like, how do you be a good father and a good writer at the same time? And he said, well, I used to have a Kerouac boner. And he said, I thought you had to be this, like, wild maniac, womanizing, drinking guy to, like, be a great writer. And he's like, and then I met Tobias Wolff. And Tobias Wolff was his mentor at Syracuse and also a wonderful writer. And he said the way Toby wrote these stories with his teeth, I'm like, they're so good. But he was so gentle with his children, and he was so kind and loving. And that just unlocked something for me. And so I think like just having a good role model, someone who does what you want to do, right? Good dad, good writer, great, you know?
I think it's either in a letter or an essay, but Seneca has this great line, and he says, we can't choose our parents, but we can choose whose children we would like to be. Ooh, yeah. And so when I think about role models, like, obviously there's things you learn from your parents about what to do and not do, but the idea that like that's to go like in my family, right? Or like, but my parents always did it this way. I think that's a very small, like, uninspired way to think about it. You should go, just as you wouldn't go, oh, there's a series of writers in my family, that's why I do it, or I come from a long line of musicians or something. Yeah. You would go, who are the greatest of all time? Those are my influences. Yeah. That's the tradition that I'm trying to continue. And I think you can do that with parenting. I mean, you can do it with anything, but why not do it with parenting? Why not go, Mr. Rogers is who I look to as my model or whatever. You don't have to be related to them.
Yeah. So Jay-Z said the same thing. He was like, we were kids without fathers, so we found our fathers on wax. So that was kind of cool. But the other thing I would say is cross-gender, because
yes, also, for sure.
I think a lot of I think finding women writers who are mothers or artists who are mothers, that always, for some reason, because the Michael Chabon joke, you know, he says the thing historically that's handy for men is that the bar for fathers is so historically low. You know, he says that's a handy thing. But mothers have always been like taken to this, you know, a much higher and more impossible standard. And so I feel like reading stories of mothers who were great artists or mothers who were great writers, I found that at a certain point to be a little bit more helpful than just...
Did you like the baby on the fire escape?
I thought that was good, like a good survey. Yeah. I think, and there's terrible cautionary tales too.
Well, what I liked about that book, there's a book called The Baby on the Fire Escape, which is more about female writers and artists. I was joking, there's not a lot of good creative men parents. Yeah. But then going like, oh yeah, a lot of the female ones were terrible too. And that it's more of the problem of being very self-involved and dedicated to your thing. Other things can fall by the wayside, and it's not so much a gender or a societal thing. It's a individual thing.
Well, and it's interesting in a lot of stories of parents that are good. I think this is worth saying. And bringing to the front, a lot of people who are good parents and also good writers, they have a good partner.
Yes.
That, you know, like Ursula K. Le Guin she was great, but she also had a husband that did his share.
Well, did you like her quote in the book? I mean, this is a good place to stop.
Yeah, definitely.
She says, it's impossible for one person to do two jobs. And she says, art is a job, being a parent is a job. But she said two people can do three jobs. And yes, I think the partnership and caring and sharing the load, it's what it's all about.
If anyone, and I'll end with another quote by her.
Okay.
My favorite quote by her, if anyone's thinking about being an artist and becoming a parent, is she says, babies eat books. Babies eat books, but they spit them out in pieces again, and you can tape the pieces back together and put them together later.
That's beautiful.
So,
well, awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you, dude.
Thanks everyone for coming.